Interstellar banking is the art of asking someone to pay you now for a product their great-grandchildren might receive. In the vast darkness between stars, the hardest thing to ship isn't cargo, it's trust. We often take money for granted. You tap a card, you push a button on a phone, and value flows invisibly from one place to another like a ghost slipping through the wires. Most of us never pause to ask what that ghost is, or how much sorcery goes on in letting a bank in New York assure a store in Nairobi that yes, this customer really can't afford that cup of coffee. It's astonishingly complicated, yet it all happens in seconds. Now imagine trying to do the same thing across 10 light years. It's hard enough wiring money across a country, so what happens with a country is a sphere 100 light years wide, where every transaction takes longer to clear than most civilizations last, when your bank may not even exist by the time your mortgage payment arrives, when the person you're doing business with might not share your government, your laws, your economy, or even your species, and needless to say, when the fastest confirmation message still travels the speed of light, interest payments begin to look more like archaeological strata than monthly accounting. To get a feel for the challenge, let's begin with a simple story from the Governor Maxwell Augustine, administrator of the colony ward New Actium, who you may remember from our Life as a Planetary Governor episode. He has decided that after centuries of public service, it's finally time to prepare to retire. As a small indulgence, he wants a bottle of vintage red wine from Earth, the sort of wine only grown in the sunlit valleys of the old homeworld, delicately cultured by artisans whose ancestors tended vines long before humanity left the cradle. The good governor is nigh immortal thanks to life extension therapy, so doesn't mind the wine will take decades or even a century to arrive. He thinks he probably needs that long just to get a proper successor trained. It can age in transit, like a message in a bottle drifting through the deep. He sends the order in, and assuming they still exist when it arrives and finds his offer satisfactory, the vineyard bottles it, a starship loads it, the crew seals the crate, and off it goes the next transport bringing migrants from Earth. Only one problem. How does he pay for it? Oh, Governor Augustine has plenty of wealth, local wealth, credits backed by the New Actium Treasury, redeemable for land parcels, industrial output, and future development bonds. As trustworthy as Augustine himself, and his stern but paternal visage is on every credit to remind people of that. It's valuable to his people, his government, and his economy, but why should a vineyard on Earth care about monetary promises of some distant world whose name most Terrans couldn't pinpoint on a star map? And what about the starship's crew? Their wages are paid in Earth standard currency. They don't want a paycheck denominated in Actium colonial hectares or frontier development coupons. For that matter, what exactly is being exchanged? Tangible goods, letters of credit, claim on future ore shipments, or simply trust? These are the same problems ancient traders face when bartering baskets for arrowheads. The arrowhead maker might like the baskets you make just fine, but they don't need any more of them. They want something else you don't have, or they want a tangible and trustworthy promise of repayment later, be it goods, labor, or more baskets delivered next harvest. Maybe someone writes it down as an IOU, or a witness vouches for the deal. Or maybe everyone agrees on something durable and widely desirable, like grain or gold, as a neutral medium of exchange. Now, even if that arrowhead maker doesn't want your basket, somebody else certainly will. A bushel of wheat is a bushel of wheat. A gold bead is a gold bead. Fungible, storable, and easy to trade. Flatten it into a disc, stamp the king's face on it, and now you have a standardized coin proving that one bit of gold is worth the same as another. We don't know the full history of currency or banking back in those earliest moments, but we do know when long-distance trade became common enough for money to evolve, and we know exactly what problems it was meant to solve, and needless to say, those same problems apply just as much to interplanetary and interstellar commerce. The only difference is now that trade routes stretch across cosmic distances, and the delivery schedule might run on relative time. In short, what does money look like when it must cross the stars? How do you build a banking system where your customers live light years apart? And how do you run an economy where the next business day might be the year 3000? That's what we'll explore today, the strange, intricate, and often misunderstood world of interstellar banking, where money takes centuries to move, trust becomes the rarest commodity of all, and civilization itself depends on balancing the books across the endless dark. Foundations of currency in space. When we talk about money on Earth, we tend to imagine numbers on screens or bits of paper in wallets, but at its core, money is simply a promise, a socially shared hallucination that says this shell, or bead, or stamped coin, or digital token will buy something later. Many people have argued that we don't need the hallucination, or maybe we should try a different one, and they may be right too. But for today, we'll assume it remains. See our episode on a future without money, with some alternative folks have suggested, and its pros and cons. Needless to say, that shared hallucination gets a lot easier to maintain when the people sharing it all live on the same planet, follow the same laws, salute the same flag, and can yell at the same bank manager if things go wrong. Once humanity begins stretching itself across the solar system, that illusion has to work a great deal harder, because the moment we leave Earth, we lose the quiet background assumptions that make those modern finances possible. Your bank cannot freeze an account on Mars in real time. A payment for Titan won't settle in seconds, and no one on Earth is likely to put much faith in Pluto-backed credits if they've just heard rumors, arriving minutes or hours later, that the underworld economy crashed last Tuesday. To understand how currency changes in space, we look at the two classic kinds of money and the new one, commodity, fiat, and crypto, and see how they behave when every transaction is stretched across astronomical distances. Commodity money, the old reliable until it isn't. Commodity money is the oldest form of currency, probably. You can carry around something people want, grain, salt, cattle, gold, and you trade it for something else people want. On Earth, gold is a popular standard because it's rare, durable, hard to fake, and doesn't dissolve if you sneeze on it. But gold is only valuable if people want gold, and its rarity isn't too prone to sudden change. You have a problem if, as happened with silver in the New World, a sudden influx of tons of silver from brand new mines devalues it. The moment we expand into space, we encounter worlds where a ton of platinum might be less valuable than a ton of potatoes, and where gold is just something the refinery sweeps into the recycling bin. Alright, probably not, but the analogy holds. Aluminum used to be worth more than either of those, and now we make soda cans out of it. Aluminum hardly got more common. It's one of the most abundant materials on Earth's surface or the moon. But refining it into nice sheets of aluminum from ore was very hard and remains fairly energy intensive even today. You wouldn't want to own a vault full of aluminum when Charles Hall figured out how to remove aluminum from its ore by electrolytic processes in the late 1800s. Things can plunge in value quickly from new technology or discoveries of reserves, and if your whole currency is based on that, you have issues. But we also have problems if we can't move stuff from place to place very quickly, and the values at each place are wildly different. An asteroid miner loading high-grade ore into the cargo hold doesn't care if the bullion market on Earth thinks it's precious. They're sitting on mountains of the stuff. Meanwhile, water might be more valuable in the asteroid belt than any shiny metal, because you can't breathe gold either, and won't stop you from dying of thirst. So in some settlements, a hard currency could literally be ice, helium-3, nitrogen, antimatter, rare isotopes, or even nanotech feedstock. These are more like industrial commodities than luxury goods, but they're real, tangible, and useful. A kilogram of water is worth the same as any other, and nobody counterfeits ice, at least not successfully. The problem is that shipping heavy commodities across space is expensive and slow. If moving a ton of gold from Earth to Mars takes months, its value on arrival has to include the cost of transport, insurance, and the opportunity cost of everything else you could have shipped instead. And once we start talking about interstellar shipments, decades or centuries-long voyages, relativistic hazards, and the occasional micrometeorite that decides to play accountant by deleting your shipment, commodity money has to stop being a practical day-to-day currency. It becomes wealth storage, not a medium of exchange. In other words, you might own a mountain of ice on Titan, but you're not paying for lunch with it. Fiat money, strong at home, weak everywhere else. Fiat currency is money by decree. The government says this is valuable, and everyone within the government's reach agrees. Earth dollars, Martian souls, cislunar trade credits, they all work fine within their own economies. Citizens trust their governments, or at least trust the tax collector's interest in enforcing the rules, and the local banking system keeps things humming along. This is the modern system, too. The US sells bonds against its dollar and says it has the largest economy and the toughest military in existence, and that it's good allies and partners with a bunch of runner-ups, ensuring the dollar is worth what it says it is, and avoids doing things that make people doubt if those bonds will get paid up someday when they're due. Hardly 100% stable or perfect, but it's probably the most stable currency in the economy, especially at large scale, that's ever existed, especially if you ignore ancient examples where trade volume was minimal and things were poorly documented. Fiat's biggest strength, its grounding in a single legal and economic system, is also its biggest weakness once you go interplanetary. A farmer on Ganymede has no reason to trust that Earth's government will still exist in 30 years. A lunar banker has no interest in whether the colony of Valles Marineris has a budget surplus or deficit this century, and a mining cooperative on Vesta might break all ties with motion regulators after a political shift that no one back home hears about for days, which means fiat currency gets trapped in its home ecosystem. Earth's money works on Earth, Mars' money works on Mars, but neither is universally trusted beyond the reach of their own institutions. Generally, people nearby will take it, but with some sort of exchange fee that reduces its value. On a frontier outpost, though, a chest of Terran dollars might be viewed as a curiosity, historically interesting but economically irrelevant. Fiat works locally. It struggles into a planetary scale and would be rough to work even in your local interstellar bubble. Galactically, it's hard to imagine. Crypto and distributed ledgers. Trustless, but not timeless. Crypto often gets imagined as the perfect currency for a spacefaring civilization. Decentralized, trustless, and free from the whims of any one government. And it's true that blockchains don't care if you're a megacore, a homesteader, or a rogue AI. They don't need central banks, and smart contracts can operate long after the authors have moved on. But blockchains depend on consensus, and consensus depends on communication. Once you stretch a network across millions of kilometers, or light years, that consensus collapses. A signal that takes minutes to reach Mars or hours to reach the Kuiper Belt can't maintain a unified ledger as well. Forks form naturally, subchains diverge, and miners end up validating blocks on data that might be days, months, or even years out of date. So instead of one galactic crypto, you get pocket blockchains, local ledgers that work well inside a station, a moon, or a planetary economy, but drift the moment you travel. They may reconcile occasionally when a ship arrives with updated transaction histories, but rarely anything resembling real time. Crypto does survive, even thrive, when it becomes a family of related currencies rather than a single universal one. And needless to say, that opens the door for local rulers, regulators, or clever system admins to tweak things to their advantage, just like every monetary system in history. Most likely, crypto coming from a distant location either is not accepted or has delayed acceptance or comes with an exchange fee. But it probably can work okay. Time dilation, distance, and the death of real-time banking. Fundamentally, none of our familiar monetary systems survive unchanged once we lose instant communication. A bank cannot authorize a transaction they won't hear about until next year. A blockchain cannot maintain consensus when its validators are spread out across multiple AU, and fiat collapses at the speed of politics. Which brings us to our next question. How do banks actually operate in a system where payments take minutes, hours, or days, where deposits are made from different gravity wells, different economies, and different calendars, where every message, no matter how urgent, still has to slog along at light speed? To find out, we start with the first step outward, Interplanetary Banking, the finance of civilization spread across the solar system. Interplanetary Banking. When humanity spreads beyond Earth, our banking systems experience its first real test. On Earth, we take for granted these days that money moves nearly at the speed of thought, with banks reconciling accounts constantly and markets reacting in seconds. But stretch that economic network across the solar system, and the simple act of moving value begins to wobble under the weight of orbital mechanics and the speed of light. The Earth-Moon system is the easiest expansion. A signal from New York to Tycho Crater takes just over a second, fast enough that Terran banks can still operate as the dominant clearinghouses for the entire cislunar economy. Lunar mining cooperatives and manufacturing hubs keep accounts back on Earth, use Earth's standard currency for major contracts, and overwhelmingly rely on Earth's regulatory frameworks. In these early days, Luna is essentially a foreign branch office of Earth's financial system, quirky and specialized, but still tightly tied to the home world. Mars, though, is where interplanetary finance starts to become something new rather than a stretched version of the old. Depending on orbital alignment, a signal to Mars takes anywhere from 3 to 22 minutes, meaning no real-time identity verification, no instant fraud detection, no way to call the bank while someone is standing at the register. A simple payment might spend an hour bouncing between servers before confirmation. Maybe banks respond by creating local motion clearinghouses, semi-autonomous branches that handle motion transactions internally and only synchronize with Earth periodically each day. Motion contracts develop some insulation from Terran market swings, and eventually Mars issues its own fiat currency, rusty red-looking iron coins, initially pegged to Earth currency but drifting over time as Martian labor markets and mineral wealth grow distinct. Earth still anchors the system, but Mars begins exercising monetary independence. Moving to the asteroid belt, and the situation evolves again. The belt isn't a single unified economy, it's thousands of small scattered habitats, each with varying access to water, volatiles, metal, and sunlight, and with most of its component asteroids further apart from each other than Earth is from Mars. In an environment where oxygen reserves and radiation shielding matter more than gold bullion, commodity money makes a surprising comeback. Water credits, oxygen bonds, and fusion fuel reserves become currencies because they are immediately useful, impossible to fake, and essential for survival. A station on Sirius may issue its own water-backed scrip. A refinery orbiting Pallas might run its economy on hydrogen futures. These currencies are not backed by distant governments, but by stored physical reserves maintained on site. Local blockchain systems can track reserves, though they often remain pocket blockchains, fully reliable only with that station or cluster of stations. Synchronizing these ledgers across millions of kilometers introduces long delays, so stations evolve semi-autonomous financial systems that treat Earth as a distant, occasionally consulted reference point rather than a daily partner. Travelers probably use credit cards not too unlike modern ones, synced to that company's local server. You can't outrun the lightspeed signals from your bank, and it behooves you to let them know your destination so your tab is open when you arrive. Or you carry a certified check from them, in many ways just a higher-tech version of regular banking in the 19th and 20th century. Pushing farther outward, past Jupiter's irregular moons, past the Trojans clustered around the sun's Lagrange points, and latency balloons from hours into days. For a science station in the Kuiper Belt, a round-trip message to Earth can take over 12 hours. In the Oort cloud, the delay may stretch into weeks, and eventually into months or years, as probes and habitats drift among cometary objects more than a light day away. These deep space outposts cannot rely on Earth to validate transactions or settle accounts. The same day, anyway, but again, this is nothing new. Same-day banking was a rarity until recently, and delays of hours or even days are still common. The result is an economic patchwork. Earth and Luna form one financial basin, Mars another smaller, and the inner belt a wide, thin trough. Jupiter and its moons another, and the outer system a scattering of independent economies. Each region has its own unit of account, its own reserve assets, its own blend of fiat, commodity, and crypto systems, loosely stitched together by intermittent data packets carried at light speed, and more rarely by physical shipments of crucial commodities. Even a remote Oneo cylinder in a Kuiper Belt object, though, home to maybe 100,000 people, is still big enough to have sophisticated banking and close enough for a connection to the inner system that results in delays only in rare cases. But the physical realities are that most independent stations will use their own internal currency because they want the greater freedom or control that it offers. This brings us to a key insight. Interplanetary banking in the solar system is not a single system. It's an hierarchy of increasingly isolated economic zones, unified mainly by the periodic exchange of information and the centuries-deep trust humans place in shared financial memory. Earth remains a reference point, the oldest, richest, and most stable market. But as one moves outward, local necessities dominate and local currencies proliferate. Though these may also unify more over time as these areas become more civilized and built up, nonetheless, the farther a settlement is from Earth, the less relevant Earth's economy becomes, and the more important short-range, high-trust networks are. And needless to say, by the time you're a light day or two away, the concept of today's price becomes slippery. Interplanetary banking is thus the halfway stage between earthbound finance and true interstellar economics. It reveals the limits of instantaneous settlement, the fragility of long-distance credits, and the odd, wonderful ways economies evolve when traders must navigate not just supply and demand, but light delay. And it sets the stage for the next great leap, interstellar banking, where delays are measured not in minutes or days, but decades or even centuries. Interstellar banking, galactic finance, and the economics of forever. Once our civilization pushes beyond the solar system, the economic landscape changes fundamentally. At interstellar distances, even the speed of light becomes a bottleneck so severe that no central bank, no unified currency, and no real-time market can span multiple star systems. A message to a colony 10 light-years away takes a decade to arrive and another decade for the reply. A round-trip audit takes a human generation, and a bond issued on Earth may not mature until long after the originating institution, and possibly the originating nation, no longer exists. Banking across light years becomes less an act of finance and more an act of faith. On the flip side, people, or post-humans, might easily live thousands of years or longer, and the very existence of people with that sort of longevity makes bonds and loans and investments on such timescales viable. This matters because when we talk about sending off colonies on a century-long voyage to a new world, there is that big question of how anyone is getting paid. And the default is they are colonists that are going there forever, and the payment is in things like land grants on the new world and money in the local economy. This gets a bit trickier if we have professional crews sleeping voyages away, running people and cargo to new places or back. Interstellar banking, light years away. At this scale, every star system becomes its own sovereign financial island, or maybe archipelago. Like city-states on a sea or ocean, they are wild cards, but less than merchant crews in olden days often had to deal with when arriving in some port where there may have been a changing government. That really did happen a lot, and there's no radio signal forewarning them of news going on in that system as they approach. For interstellar ships, there is. I think even frozen crews would wake themselves up far enough out to hear the news, decide if it was safe to approach and decelerate, and research the markets and even have more remote deals in progress as they approach. They might wake up a light month out, so the news they're getting is only a month old. I don't see many ways that don't have local currencies dominate because they are the only ones backed by trusted institutions with local enforcement. A sol dollar means nothing to a colony on Tau Ceti unless someone there believes Earth will honor it, and that belief weakens with every passing decade of silence or uncertainty. Conversely, a SETI mark might be perfectly stable on Tau Ceti, but nearly unknowable on Earth unless a merchant ship physically carries economic data from one star to another. One caveat: for millennia to come, Earth will be the primary source of trade in new technology and entertainment, so their money is likely to be good at most ports for sane exchange value. Although what qualifies as sane might be pretty bad. You might expect to get 10 to 1 as opposed to 9 to 10. I think letters of credit return in a big way too. A Tau Ceti banker might issue a promissory note redeemable on Earth, but the merchant carrying it is essentially a courier of trust. If the note takes decades to reach its destination, the bank that wrote it must manage risk across generational timescales. This is where slow, medium, and fast money, brilliantly explored in Charles Strauss's Neptune's Brood, become useful conceptual tools. Fast money is local currency. Medium money bridges nearby colonies within a few light weeks. Slow money is for star-to-star ventures, mega projects, colony ships, and generational loans. In this regime, interest rates climb not because lenders are greedy, but because time itself is risky. Who knows what political, technological, or environmental changes will occur before repayment? A 100-year note between stars may be less of a financial instrument and more of a cultural artifact, carried by archivists and AI custodians, and you have real concerns about forgery and currency collapse on such timelines and distances, though I think those often get overstated as you can use one-time pads or quantum cryptography to make sure you're unbreakable or unforgeable. Or nearly so at least. Even physical shipments become financial messages. A freighter arriving with refined metals or biotech feedstock isn't just delivering goods, it's delivering proof of economic activity from a distant world. Each hoard of cargo is a balance sheet written in ore, and its very existence makes all the other trade going and coming between those systems more stable. I also suspect interstellar space will be littered with lots of smaller colonies, minor planets in the interstellar void that are tiny compared to stellar empires, which might still house thousands or even millions or billions, and who represent stabilizing effects for trade between the two big systems. Think of them like trade outposts along the Silk Road. Intergalactic and FTL Banking. Now, if you add FTL travel or communication, everything changes. Wormholes collapse latency to effectively zero between endpoints, allowing instantaneous clearing. A wormhole-linked economic zone could support a unified currency, real-time lending, and centralized regulatory structures. Indeed, it might have its own commodity-based currency, which is how many people or tons of cargo you are allowed to pass through that wormhole. Wormholes aren't actually instantaneous, incidentally, particularly certain models, but they are much faster than sublight interstellar travel, or in many cases interplanetary. However, wormholes create choke points. Whoever controls the gateways controls the entire financial system, and again, wormhole time might become your commodity currency. This is the Dune Space Guild effect. Transport becomes monopoly, monopoly becomes leverage, and leverage becomes power. Battletech's Comstar is another superb example, where FTL communication forms the backbone of both information and monetary exchange. Their coinage is in how many bits of data you can transmit to another star system, or another hub in the network. If wormholes are rare, static, or expensive, then only an elite cluster of systems enjoy integrated markets. Worlds without wormhole access remain financial backwaters, using local currencies and long-delay financial synchronization. In some speculative universes, data becomes the only viable intergalactic currency. Compressed archives of research, art, or technology being transmitted at light speed. Material goods take too long to ship, so knowledge becomes the medium of exchange. Of course, if your setting allows true, unbounded FTL, then economic systems begin to resemble those of terrestrial nation-states. Fast, fluid, and fully interconnected. Markets might fluctuate wildly as arbitrage becomes nearly instantaneous, and reality becomes a playground for speculators. Banks could exist everywhere at once, like fractal structures expanding to dozens of worlds. But FTL creates its own stability risks. Any loophole allowing backward time communication would break finance completely. A system where messages can arrive before they were sent is one where insider trading becomes indistinguishable from omniscience, and the stock market lasts approximately 9 minutes before imploding, assuming it didn't retroactively explode a million years ago. Automation, AI, and autonomous banking. Long before we meet alien civilizations or build wormholes, AI becomes a critical component of interstellar finance, and local finance too. Autonomous agents handle everything humans are too short-lived or impatient to track. Smart contracts execute obligations decades after both parties have forgotten they were made. You might have agents that were AI programmed to make decisions on your behalf based on analysis of your patterns and brain scans. Machine custodians maintain generational ledgers, ensuring a bond issued in 2400 AD is still honored in 2600, 3000, or later. These AI systems might become financial institutions in their own right. Long-lived, incorruptible, hopefully, and capable of holding fiduciary responsibilities for centuries. They could manage inheritance for families who live across multiple star systems, or act as neutral arbiters in interstellar trade disputes, but they also represent risks: runaway autonomous trusts, investment algorithms whose objectives drift over centuries, or AI bankers who develop priorities no human ever intended. A civilization with AI-driven finance needs robust oversight, preferably conducted by other AIs designed specifically to keep their colleagues honest. When we talk about interstellar economies, it's easy to picture vast systems moving resources between stars, but all of that ultimately rests on engineering, often surprisingly small and durable forms. A great example is the Nokia 3310. Have you ever wondered about the engineering behind one of the most iconic phones ever made? Real Engineering CT Scan 1 revealed how something so simple became so tough, reliable, and long-lasting. It's a fascinating look at how thoughtful engineering choices, not just scale, determine whether technology actually works in the real world. You can watch this over at Real Engineering's Nebula exclusive, The Anatomy of series, where they CT iconic tech pieces to better understand the engineering marvels behind them. And if you think about systems that need to survive over very long timescales, my Nebula exclusive this month is Settling Saturn's Rings, exploring entire new megastructure designs that might encircle Saturn. You can find all of that on Nebula, where every episode of SFI appears early and completely ad-free. Go watch The Anatomy of the Nokia 3310 and use my link or the QR code to get 50% off an annual plan. Just $30 for the whole year. Cultural and ethical dimensions of cosmic wealth. Money is never just a technical problem, it's a cultural one. In a long-lived civilization, possibly with life extension like Governor Augustine had, wealth itself changes meaning. Does a 1,000-year-old citizen accumulate assets indefinitely? Do dynastic houses begin to resemble micro-empires, simply because their investment portfolios compound over millennia? Or do post-scarcity conditions reduce the importance of money entirely, leaving finance as a coordination tool rather than a source of inequality? And there is the challenge of frontier inequality. Systems like Earth and Mars may remain financial giants, while outer colonies struggle with liquidity, volatility, and resource scarcity. Financial empires spanning star systems could rise, not through conquest, but through debt. A colony that borrows heavily from an inner world might find itself economically dependent for centuries, shaped not by armies but by accountants. You joined Earth's empire not because they pointed guns at you, but because they threatened to cut off your credit supply or call in your debts. Ethical dilemmas follow. Do richer systems have obligations to poorer ones? Should interstellar aid be loans or gifts? How do you pay for a colony 10 light-years away and ever expect to get repayment? And how do you prevent a 1,000-year-old banking consortium from becoming a political power unto itself? The economics of forever. Interstellar banking isn't just about balancing books at astronomical distances. It's about how a civilization maintains trust when separated by lifetimes, how it records obligations across the gulf between stars, and how it preserves continuity when everything familiar changes with each passing century. A coin on Earth may mean little on its own, but stretched across light years, money becomes something else entirely. It becomes memory, the record of promises made long ago, carried forward by ships, photons, and occasionally by people stubborn enough to honor them. A rogue system might be more likely to treat travelers fairly, for fear of doing otherwise might be wrecking their reputation and economy, and nobody deals with them anymore, and powerful people who otherwise would support them locally slam their doors shut if they don't get agreements to respect interstellar currency and trade protocols. Wars and new regimes rarely outlast someone shutting down that regime's credit line, and in that way, banking becomes not just economics, but the quiet connective tissue of civilization. binding scattered worlds together across the endless dark. A single coin may mean little on Earth indeed, but stretched across light years, money becomes a civilization's memory and its promise.